My whole life I've kept a daily gratitude list of 5 things every morning for which I'm grateful. And in this experience, I kept thinking, I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful it's over. I really felt like I'd been granted early release for good behavior off this insane asylum we call Earth. I really did. I felt free. It's just so happy. And I remember also thinking my whole life I've wondered what would take me out. And how funny that my first real encounter with the medical world was what took me out. Hello everyone, welcome to Beyond the Veil. Today we hear from Rosemary Thornton, a widow who experienced the afterlife after her husband's tragic death and her own battle with cancer. Her journey beyond life will inspire and move you. My name is Rosemary Thornton. I live in the Midwest because I love watching corn grow, and I've written 10 books, and 9 books were principally on historic architecture. My 10th book, one which I was actually very reluctant to write, was about my near-death experience. I suppose the story of my near-death experience begins with 2016. I had been married for 10 years, and my husband was a successful professional. Thought we had a pretty good life. I was a writer. I had written for newspapers, magazines, written books, everything. And then one day he came home for lunch and ended his life. And I pretty much lost my mind. Being a writer, a sensitive soul, an empath, I really went off the deep end. Our last conversation had not been a pleasant one. He had started an argument over the phone, and he ended the phone call and then took his life. So the amount of guilt, self-recrimination, and blame that I felt was off the charts, to say the least. It was enormous. So for 29 months, I was a mess. I actually prayed 3 prayers every night. It was, God, heal me or let me go. My second prayer was, no more hard decisions. I had to face so many hard decisions after his death. When somebody ends their life abruptly like this, there are a lot of legal messes that have to be untangled. And my third prayer, I had been fascinated by NDEs throughout my life. I mean, fascinated. When Raymond Moody's book came out, Life After Life, little trade paperback, I think it came out in '76, I read it again and again and again. And then Daniel Brinkley and Betty Eadie and all those folks, I just was drawn to those stories so powerfully, and I loved reading them. My third prayer was, I wanted to be spared the life review. I didn't want to see all this mess. Having gone through it once and seeing how hellish that existence was, I begged God, when I go, let's skip the life review part. And I guess a few weeks I met with a financial advisor because I now had to be responsible for my own budget and my finances. And she was very perky, this financial advisor. And perky people make me very nervous. But she said, Rosemary, where do you see yourself in 2 years? I mean, I really had no expectation that I would survive this thing. And she said, that's not very positive. And I said, yeah, well, it's truthful. As I said, I asked God every night, let me go or heal me, and I couldn't see any way that I could be healed. And then 29 months after my husband, I was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer. I was pretty angry at God at this point, because I was like, you know what, I was pretty clear. Heal me or let me go. I didn't mean gradually. I mean like lay down and be gone. So, I got into the whole round robin of oncologists and appointments, and I was scheduled to start chemo and radiation and all that mess, and I was so frightened. I was like, wow, haven't I been on the rack long enough? Can we just skip this part and just let me go? So I had a surgery scheduled, and during the surgery, something went wrong. And when I woke up in the recovery room after this little surgical procedure, I was bleeding profusely. And I told the attending nurse, I said, hey, I'm bleeding a lot. And she said, oh, that's perfectly common for what we've done. You can expect that. I was like, no, something's really gone wrong. 3 times I told her that. 3 times she said, why don't you get home and lay down in your own bed, you'll be fine. I've since learned, and this was a gynecological cancer, I've since learned that a gynecological bleed is considered a life-threatening emergency, as it should be. So I went home, dutifully. This is really my first encounter with the medical world, because I'd been raised as somebody who believed in prayer for healing, and also that when you're really stressed, that's when disease kind of creeps up, you depress your immune system. And I know that's not true for everybody, but for me, I'd had really good success in just calming down, saying a few prayers, and trusting the process. We're built to heal. We are designed to heal. We're not designed to get sicker and sicker. So I went home, and I wasn't home very long when I realized things were getting much worse. And so I was bleeding pretty profusely at this point. And I had this beautiful home with wall-to-wall, almost white carpet. I waited my whole life to have white carpet. So I was very concerned about messing up the carpet. I was less concerned about bleeding to death and more concerned about messing up the carpet. Because, it's a real housekeeping nightmare to clean up a house after that. So I actually went and stood in my walk-in shower. And I thought, well, at least here I can't make a mess. And I had been thinking about, I think it's 1 Corinthians 10:13, which says God will show you a way out. And I thought, I went to the doctor, I did all the stuff you're supposed to do, now I'm bleeding to death. Maybe this is God's mercy. Maybe this is my way out. And I thought about it long and hard, and I thought, all I have to do is sit down on this shower floor, and I'm out of here. And nobody will say anything except, oh, what a shame. She went to the doctor, he screwed it up, the end. I really thought hard about this. And then I thought, so many people had rushed into the fray to save me. I mean, people had really worked it trying to save me. There's a Vincent van Gogh painting called The Good Samaritan. And in that painting, it shows the tremendous effort the Good Samaritan is putting into getting the wounded traveler up on his beast of burden to take him to the inn. And I realized in seeing that painting, I had it in my home for a time. It really moved me deeply, but I realized so many people put so much effort into keeping me alive that I kind of had a duty to continue living for them. So I stepped out of the shower and I called my friends who were in the living room and I said, I'm bleeding to death. We need to get an ambulance. The ambulance came, took me to a little ER. It was a standalone ER. It did not have a hospital attached to it, which I kind of think we shouldn't do that anymore. Standalone ER, they made a few more mistakes. Again, they did not take my concerns seriously. Honestly, the janitor who had to mop up after I tried to walk through the facility, the janitor was more concerned about me than the medical staff, because he was like, good Lord, what happened to this hallway? Because I was bleeding profusely, and I was put in a little cubicle, and they gave me a shot of something for pain, which was actually a morphine derivative, which really did. I've given this talk a few times to a live audience, and when I do, I love to look out at the audience, and I can see the medical personnel. When I say they gave me, with plunging blood pressure and bleeding out, they gave me a morphine derivative, and all the medical personnel in the audience walked up. Oh. But they didn't, and they left me alone in the room. Actually, right before that, this RN had been by my side while the doctor was examining me, and this very sweet, genuinely sweet, motherly RN held my hand. And at this point, I was very frightened. I mean, really frightened. It's one thing to think, oh, I wish I was dead. There's another thing to know, that bus is coming for you. It won't be long now. And I said, promise me you're not going to let me die. And she was so sweet. She said, honey, we have many solutions for this. We're not going to let you die. I was comforted by that. So then after that, they gave me the shot for the painkiller. And then they left the room. Well, my friend was still present with me. My friend sat down beside the gurney. And he said after that shot, I passed out pretty quickly. And meanwhile, he said my blood pressure, they had one of those automated blood pressure thingies on me that, kept clicking away. But he said the blood pressure kept going down, down, down. It got to 32/25. And then it went to error. But meanwhile, I was having the time of my life. It was very close that my last words on earth were, that's some really good stuff, right before I passed out. I mean, the room was kind of dancing around me. It was all great. And then I lost consciousness. I realized I popped out of my body like toast out of a toaster. I mean, it was very dramatic the way I popped right out. And the second I started floating further and further away from my body, I knew exactly what was happening. I mean, I think we need to give our soul a lot more credit than we do for having an awareness or a knowing of what's happening. And sometimes I think life in this modern society is just so much static that we lose those broadcast signals. But in this experience, my first thought was, I'm dying. Or no, my very first thought was, my heart has stopped. And I thought, how do I know that? I don't know how I know that, but I know that's right. And then my next thought was, I'm dying. And then being the longtime writer and editor, I said, actually, you're not dying, you're dead. Because when you're going on to your reward, the most important thing is correcting your tense. But the other thing is I thought that was pretty funny. And I laughed out loud. Because here I am, floating away from my body, no intention of ever going back, ever. And I realized everything I really am went with me. My voice sounds the same, my laughter sounds the same, my macabre sense of humor is the same, even my intellect, as I'm observing this environment, this new environment I'm in. And I can't tell you how comforting that was to know that everything I really am had made the transition. And I thought about, actually I asked myself this very question, what got left behind on that gurney? And I thought, the fear, the anxiety, the guilt, the regret, the doubts, the worries, the upset, the self-recriminations, all of it. And I did not have a life review, which was great. But what was interesting is I remembered the firemen who'd come to my house to load me into that ambulance. And I remember how kind and thoughtful and solicitous they were. They were such gentle souls and so gentle with me and so kind to me. And I just remembered how much love they showed me and how that touched me so. I mean, I was no one to them. I was a perfect stranger. So moving on through this experience, I was really excited to be out of this world. One of the thoughts I had was, I was pretty worried about all these bills I had coming. I lived on a pretty tight budget, and I thought, those bills have ceased to be a problem. And I also remember thinking I was supposed to start a tutorial on chemotherapy on Monday in anticipation of receiving the treatment. And I thought, that has also ceased to be a problem. I won't be needing that. And I was supposed to go to the radiation place and get a tattoo. And I thought, none of this is going to be a problem anymore for me. And I was just so relieved. My whole life I've kept a daily gratitude list of 5 things every morning for which I'm grateful. And in this experience, I kept thinking, I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful it's over. I really felt like I'd been granted early release for good behavior off this insane asylum we call Earth. I really did. I felt free. It's just so happy. And I remember also thinking my whole life I've wondered what would take me out. And how funny that my first real encounter with the medical world was what took me out. Go to the doctor and get into the hospital. One's fine. Boom, off you go. That was really rich. I found great humor in that, even in this experience. So I had so many thoughts pouring through my head at once. I've often likened it to being like in this life, we're at 60 amps, and when I died, it's like I went to 100,000 amps. There were so many ideas and so many directions and so many thoughts. And one of my first encounters, I was floating in blackness, and I've heard people call it as a velvety, perfect peace, and that's a good description. It was comforting me. And I even remember thinking, I've been really scared of the dark ever since my husband's death. And yet in this blackness, I felt the most perfect peace. It was like it was generating peace, not just enveloped in peace, but it was actively creating peace. And oh, does that feel good? For somebody who suffered with anxiety their whole life, that was just bliss, truly. But I felt this massive presence join me, and I looked up and kind of behind me to see who had joined me in this perfect blackness. And I thought, how interesting that I'm turning my head and looking over my left shoulder. So I must have something of a humanesque form even now. Well, that's pretty cool. And I looked up at this being, and I said, and who are you? Because I was really happy. It was the happiest I've ever known in conscious memory, really and truly. It's not been an easy life. And before I could even get the question out, the answer was immediate. I mean, I didn't even finish asking. And the answer was, you, Rosemary, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original. Oh, wow, that's Genesis 1:25 and 26. I wondered about that my whole life. What does it mean to be made in the image and likeness? I was like, oh, there's an original, and I'm talking to her. It was just wonderful. And, one of the most frequent criticisms I get about my writing is that I refer to God as she. But if you're female and you encounter the original, it just feels like she. And then part 2 of that is I grew up with a very, very mean-spirited father, and when I was 14 he took off But Mom, my mother, was how I experienced and knew about love and trusted. So my father, when people would call God the Father, I'd think, oof, let's not talk about that. But I could imagine God as the loving mother. So this thing that I was made in the image and likeness and there was an original, then I remember thinking, that would have been good to know back there, but still useful information. What's next? There were so many thoughts that went through my mind at that point. And one of the thoughts was, I thought about the Bible verse from Paul when he talked about the peace that passeth all understanding. And I thought, this is that peace. That's what Paul was talking about. This is the peace that you can never describe, never define. There aren't adequate words. This is that perfect peace. And the word perfect means whole. Isn't that interesting? And the word integrity means whole too. So yeah, it's a whole piece with no spaces for anything ugly to creep in. And then the other thing that happened, there was so much. When I came back, if you told me I'd been gone for a couple of days, I would have believed it. And that's the other thing. I don't know if there's something called the Grayson scale, where you measure the depth of an NDE, named after Dr. Bruce Grayson. Well, one of the things is a distortion of time. If you're gone for 10 minutes and it feels like you were gone for 10 hours, according to Dr. Grayson, that suggests an unusually deep NDE. But in my experience, this went on and on and on. And one of the things that happened was I remembered I was talking to an angel. I just had this companion moving with me, a spiritual companion moving with me through this experience as I continued floating further and further away from my body. And I told her, I said, this whole blackness, floating, peace thing, I've been here before. Like in this 59-year experience, there's something very familiar about this. And she said, remember, your mom told you that when you were a baby, you were given up for dead. But that my mother had been sent home from the hospital when I was an infant and told, go focus on your other children, this one's gone. The hospital policy in 1959 is they're not going to let mom sit there and watch their child pass on. So my mom went home and sat with a friend from church, and they spent the night in prayer. And the next morning they came back, and I was, according to my mother, not only better but healed of the thing that was shutting down my organs and kidneys. So the angel said, that experience, it was not that you got close to death, you actually crossed over and came back. And I thought, that explains so much. Again, that would have been good to know back there, but okay, cool, what's next? And I think that explains why I was always fascinated by NDEs and why I could always experience things that other people couldn't. And my father kind of turned it into a parlor trick when I was 5 or 6 years old. He would have me play games and talk telepathically to others and listen telepathically to others, and my mother put a stop to that. But that also explained a lot. My whole life I felt quite different, like an outlier, like somebody who doesn't... Oh my gosh, there's a quote, I think it's St. Francis of Assisi, who says, we should never be too comfortable in this world. And I was like, yeah, I get that. What's it like to be comfortable in this world? So that explained a lot about my life. And then somewhere in this experience, the floating stopped, and I was in a white room. And the thing that gets me is I don't remember the transition from floating in this blackness to standing on my own 2 legs in this white room. And I think stuff happened there that either I don't have the capacity and consciousness to understand or retain, or it's the angel saying, yeah, we're going to have a little fun here, we're going to do a thing, and yeah, you're not going to know about it. But I was in this white room, standing on my feet, having gone from this floating. And in the white room, it was, I couldn't see walls, but I could see a door in front of me. And having read all those NDE books, I knew exactly what that door was. And I'm like, okay, everybody out of my way. We're doing the door. We don't need to chat, talk, anything. I'm going to get to that door as fast as I can. And the door was probably about 15 feet in front of me. And the room was filled with the most perfect white light. And yet it didn't hurt the eyes. And there was this mist falling. And it was almost like what you might call a pea soup fog. It was a very thick mist, but it was moving. It was like swirling around me. It's really cool. And I see that door, and I literally thought, I remember thinking, I don't know if I have legs or feet. I wish I'd looked down. But I thought I can perambulate with intention to that door. So I thought, yes, I want to be at that door. And so I moved as quickly as I could to the door. And as I'm walking, I see this light, or rather this fog, just swirling around me. And I still had a companion spirit, an angel with me, and I asked her, I said, oh, I had tried to focus on an individual particle of the vapor. And I asked my companion, why can't I see that? Why can't I focus? I mean, next time you're in a fog, think about focusing on an individual droplet. But the angel said, your spiritual eyes have not acclimated to this new environment, but what you're looking at are particles of light. And it was likened to a spiritual car wash, that all the muck of the earth has to be washed away from us. And there are some people who become so entrenched in their disease that they think it's part of their identity, when it's not. And that's what this light does. It cleanses us and prepares us for heaven. As a friend of mine said, leave your muddy boots at the door. And somewhere in this experience, and I don't really know the precise chronology, because what is chronology? You know, it's past, present, future. And yet Einstein said to those of us who are committed physicists, the past, present, and future are only an illusion, however persistent. So I wonder, do we create this chronology, or is that just the way our brain sorts it out? But in this chronology, in this experience, somewhere, the angel told me if I agreed to go back, I'd be restored to wholeness. And I thought, okay, good to know, out of my way. I really wanted to be through that door. So I got to the door, and the door was shut. And I remember thinking that door should be open, but it was shut. I put my right hand up to push through the door, pretty fascinated by the fact, right-handed on earth, right-handed in heaven. I thought, wow, we really take a lot of who we are with us. But I put my right hand up to push through the door, and I paused, and I asked, is this the divine will for my life? You know, that this foolish little medical mistake sends me on. And again, I couldn't even get past, is this the divine? And the answer, again, was immediate. And it wasn't just an answer with words, but it came with an infusion of knowledge. And the answer was, no, it is not. But whatever you decide, you go with all of God's mercy and blessings and love and care. There isn't a wrong decision. And boy, talk about decision fatigue. I had had so much of it in my earthly life. And being relieved of that, the decision whether to go on to heaven or come back to earth is a pretty big decision. So I love that there wasn't a wrong decision in this experience. So I said, okay, good to know. I'm out of here. And again, I proceeded to move through the door, and I was given a vision of that very motherly nurse who had held my hand there at the end. And in the vision, and it's more than a vision, it's like I was put in a room with her as a silent, invisible observer to her experience. And people ask me, well, was this really happening? No, I think it was a potential future vision. But in this vision, that nurse who'd been so kind was seated on a metal stool in the middle of a hospital supply room, surrounded by all the accoutrements that you'd see in a hospital. And she was leaning forward in the stool, head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. And she said, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die, and I lost her. And I thought, oh, come on, way to get an empath, hook me in like a fish. And then I thought, she looked to be about my age. She's lost patience. She'll get over this. She'll move on. She'll be okay. But then I wasn't just shown the vision. I was shown the grief she was experiencing. I felt it in my innermost being, like at the very center of my core. I felt that deep grief, and I recognized it as being similar to the great regret I had felt after my husband's death. And I do remember thinking, if I can spare one person that much agony on this earth, I guess I have to go back. And boy, was that sad. I put my right hand back down at my side, and like that, in a millisecond, I was back in my body on a gurney in that little ER. And I remember looking up, and I had an oxygen mask on. And I remember looking up, I'm in a different room. They had moved me. It's some point. And I remember there's an angel in the upper left-hand corner of the room. By angel, I know this sounds out there. I really wish I had a more traditional experience. That would have been easier to talk about. But it was just this ball of energy and light, beautiful colors swirling around in the upper left-hand corner of the room. And I said, hey, do you know how much effort it took to die? You know what a big deal that was? You know how frightening it was? But then it was over. Now I'm back. I mean, really? Really? What's the deal? I don't want to come back here. And she looked at me, truly. This expression I got from her was, hello, you're back. they don't answer questions. Don't bother asking, you know? But the nurse, and again, I don't know if it's the same nurse because now everybody in that little ER was in my room. I found out even the receptionist had been called to look on me. But the nurse was in my face, and my glasses were off my head, but I had an oxygen mask, and I was in a much bigger room, and this nurse was right here, and she says, "What is your name?" And I said, "Rosemary." And she said, "What year is it?" And I said, 2018. And then she said, "Where are you?" And I said, a crummy excuse for an ER. That didn't go well with her. But then I was in the hospital for several days, actually 4 days, I think. And in the hospital experience, too, it was very profound. A nurse came in the room at some point. Because once you die due to medical boo-boos, and then you come back, you get all the doctors and the nurses that are like at the top of their game. You don't get the one anymore that says, "Can you guys spell this word for me?" Which I actually had happen on my medical chart. But yeah, this one nurse came in like 2 a.m. or something to check on me. And she smiled at me. And I was, still kind of in and out of things. But she smiled at me. And when she smiled, it's like the whole room lit up with light. And it was like so much light. And I just felt the love behind that smile. And I just think about, maybe we should spend more of our life smiling at people. The room exploded in light. I started to sob. And she moved closer to me. She said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, it's just your smile. It put so much more light and beauty into the room." And I know I got pegged in that hospital was the weird one. But the other thing that happened, I had several friends. I guess 2 or 3 friends would rotate in and out who would sit with me. Because when you're not at the top of your game, it's good to have somebody sitting with you in a hospital. And when they would leave, the angels would appear around my bed, the 3 sides of the bed, the 2 sides and the foot, and they'd sing me the most beautiful songs glorifying God. And they were like 6.5, 7 feet tall, and they were dressed in robes of light. And these robes sparkled, and the more they sang songs glorifying God, the brighter those sparkles got. And the brighter the sparkles got, the more they sang songs glorifying God. And I told them, I said, "I'm really good with houses. Got an amazing memory." They said, "But melody and lyrics, not so good." And they said, "This is not for you to remember. This is for your peace. This is for your healing. And this is a thank you for agreeing to come back." Now, I used to tell people that I will remember that till my dying day, but that's not true. I will remember the angels singing to me for eternity. And, when I came back from this experience, I felt like my abdominal area was still pretty messed up. There was some pain there. And I would ask these angels, I said, "Am I going to die again? Because it seems like a lot of work and effort to just go through this again." And they said, "No, we're still making some adjustments. Things aren't quite right yet. But we're taking care of it." And I just can't explain, when you come back from this, people say they feel like they're 50% in this world and 50% in that. I didn't. I felt like I was 95% in that world and 5% in this one. And I wanted to live in that world forever. And yet, again, the noise, the static, the pressure, the depression, the sadness, all the crap of this earth tends to rush in and crowd out all that spiritual beauty. And I mean, we're here on earth to be good, to do good, to love, to be kind, to be wise. And I think we can't do that if we stay completely tuned into the angels. I mean, I don't know anybody who can. So I got sent home. I didn't want to go home because the hospital 3 times a day, actually more than that, they come to you and bring you food. And then in the in-between times, they bring you apple juice and anything you want, which is great. I love it when people bring me food. I didn't want to go home. And my doctor said, "It's time for you to go home." He said, "You have pretty much super duper low white blood cell count." He said, "All it's going to take is one opportunistic infection to take you out, and we won't be able to save you." He said, "The odds of you bleeding out now are minimal." And one of the things that happened, and I hope this isn't too much for folks, but it really touched my heart. When they had brought me back, one of the things I learned about this, I actually interviewed some ER people, a doctor and a couple nurses for my book. When somebody dies from bleeding out and their heart stops, which by the way was my cause of death, they can't just do CPR because that just pushes out more blood. So what they do is, a doctor explained to me, he said, we seal the leak, we refill the tank, and then we restart the heart. So I had been gone for more than 10 minutes, And so by medical theory, I should have come back compromised mentally. But I really felt like I came back with a major upgrade. A major upgrade. I came back feeling very different. And all that grief and all the stuff from my husband's just gone. You know, I was finally able to just miss him. To wish he'd made better choices. To wish things had gone differently. But that guilt and regret and self-hatred and self-loathing was just gone. And the angels told me, because the angels continued to talk to me after I came back, the angels told me that it had all been encapsulated. And they said, it's a messy thing, but it can't hurt you. It's sealed in a way it can never hurt you or cause you pain anymore. And that has been a blessing. That has been such a blessing. And that's proven true. This all happened 6 years ago now. And then what I was going to say, that a story I haven't shared elsewhere, but when they were patching the leak in the ER, they had stuffed me with gauze like a bird. And so there came a day at the hospital where they had to remove all this bandaging from me. And there was a tremendous amount of concern that when doing that, the bleeding would start again. And this was very touching to me because my interactions with the medical world had not been great, But a surgeon came in, and some nurses and medical staff came in for this great removing of the gauze and everything. And I said, I'm a little frightened. I don't want to bleed to death now. I've been through all this. And what the doctor said, he said, Miss Thornton, we have booked an OR. We've got an OR reserved. And he said, we're ready. If anything happens, you get whisked away. And we operate and we fix it. He said, but you are not going to die. Try not to be emotional. Ronald Reagan once said, if you tell a story enough times, you can strip the emotion away from it. I'm failing. But after this experience of being treated so dismissively by the nurses and the medical staff and being told, oh, just go home and lie down. Oh, you're fine. Oh, we're going to find you a hospital transfer soon, which is what they told me that little ER. Having a group of medical professionals say, we are not going to let you die on us. Oh my gosh, it was life-changing. So then I went home and I had good care for 2 weeks. Friends and loved ones surrounded me and took care of me for 2 weeks, and then I went back to the doctor. And they did blood work on me. Actually, it was 14 days after I had bled to death. And the doctor said it would take about 2 to 3 months for the breathlessness to end. Every time I stood up, I fainted. For the breathlessness to end and my white blood cell count to return to normal, all this other stuff. And I noticed I started getting better really fast at home. And when the blood work came back, the doctor looked at it and said, there's a problem with your blood work. And I said, what is it? He said, well, there's been an error. And I said, what is the error? He said, it's all textbook perfect right down to the decimal. All your numbers are perfect. This is 14 days after my heart stopped from bleeding out. And I said, no, that's got to be right because I'm back on my bike. I'm back to riding my bike again. He said, what? And I said, yeah, I feel fine. Ride it kind of slowly, gently. That was my first sign that something quite extraordinary had transpired. And then the second one, I had to find another doctor on the other side of the state who would even see me. The first doctor I went back to, a big, fancy, important oncologist, and I went back to him. I said, good news, I'd like to know for sure, but I'm pretty sure I was healed in heaven. And he said, hey, you're starting chemo as soon as your blood cell counts back up. And then he put on, they do the patient portals now, so you can log in and see what they say. He put mentally ill on my medical chart. And then I did have to find another doctor on the other side of the state. Well, she's about 60 miles away. And I had to go through all kinds of tests again. And ultimately, she did another surgical biopsy, which was a big deal. Huge deal. She took flesh from all kinds of places, Took flesh from places I didn't even know you could take flesh from. But yeah, they sliced me open, took a bunch of flesh, and then it was determined, in fact, that surgeon, she was an obstetrical gynecological, what do you call it? Gynecological oncologist. That's a big bunch of words. She actually came out of the surgery and greeted my friend again, who's waiting outside in the waiting room for me, threw her arms around his neck and said, she's right. There's not one cell of cancer. And she said, in fact, her flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect, were it not for all these pre-tests, from the other doctor. She said, I don't know that I'd wish she ever had cancer. And so that was a big deal. That was a very big deal to be set free from that. And, when I got home, I guess it was after all my guests left. It was a lot of fun having all those people in the house take care of me. But when I was home alone, I grabbed my Bible and it flopped open to the 23rd Psalm, and one sentence in the 23rd Psalm looked like it had been highlighted, looked like a light was shining on it, and it was, "He restoreth my soul." And I thought, that's the real healing. My soul was reset and restored. And that was a big deal. So after this, I sold everything I owned. Well, not everything, but I sold a lot of stuff. Sold my car. I had a really pretty car. But I wanted to have a simpler life, and I moved 1,000 miles due west to the Midwest because I wanted to watch corn grow, which is my favorite thing. And I ended up buying a house. It took a few years, but I ended up buying a house on the edge of a field, and the farmer planted soybeans this year. And I'm like, dude, his name is Tony, the farmer. I said, Tony, I want to see some corn. And he said, well, we got to do the soybeans in rotation. So yes, now I can look out my back door and see things grow, which makes me very, very happy. I actually put that on a dating profile. I like watching corn grow. People thought I was nutty as a fruitcake, but I meant it. I do. Who doesn't like watching things grow? Isn't it magnificent? You know, people will hear this story. I've told this story a bunch of times, and they get this idea that my life is perfect now. It's not. It's not. But I take so much joy in hearing that this story helps others. A friend shared this with me, and I put it up on my wall. I put it up in about 20 places in my house, but it said, God, please help me heal so that I can help others heal. I want to help others heal. That is my number one goal. So through this experience, I learned to stop blaming me. And to say it was life-changing, I was on a bad path. So the great blessing of my life now is I get a lot of emails every day, which people tell me my story helped lift some of the heaviness from their heart. If I had to sum up this experience, this near-death experience, in just 3 words, I could. And those 3 words would be, welcome home, dearie. When I was floating through that blackness, I felt so surrounded by beings who loved me so much. And it's like all these voices were saying, you're back. Here you are. Look at you. We're so happy to see you. And the welcome home, dearie, was prevalent. They were all so happy to be with me again. And I learned that even with our foibles and follies and peccadillos and all the things we do wrong and all the little mistakes we make, that is inconsequential to the amount of love we have. And I also learned, and this was a big lesson for me, God, of course, loves us, but God and the angels really, really, really like us too. They look at us through the very clear lens of knowing who we really are. And they're just enamored of us, just crazy about us. Like when a mother holds a newborn for the first time and looks in their eyes and just sees perfection and potential and promise. I felt that loved, that completely encased in perfect love. Thanks for watching today's video. If you want to learn how to create a profitable YouTube channel like this one, click the link in the description and let us show you how. See you on the next one.